please listen to my opinions on one of the greatest sources of conflict between progressives who want to change the world for the better. Often, when people want to change the world for the better, there's a lot of conflict on methodology, on lesser evils, on who you cooperate with. And I think this conflict might arise from justice. People don't want to cooperate with people who have done evil deeds. People don't want to collaborate with injustice. Often people are very principled, but so the sources of conflict is on whether being principled or fair or just, or meting out justice, and what do you call it when you refuse to work with someone who's evil? How this can be suboptimal. Now, of course, there is a precedent set from working with evil people, but often I think it's outweighed by the average person committing more acts of evil than an evil person who feels guilty and has been persuaded or compromised to change their ways. Now, obviously, someone who is evil can use this to their advantage by holding other people hostage, but there's also, and so I would agree that you should not hold people hostage. So I will agree with principled people on that, but you can also be principled and argue for the cases where people set a precedent, right? Because people have social bonds and value what their friends and loved ones say, and I guess people also have power. And it's unfortunate that one would have to compromise with the powerful. So obviously there would be systemic flaws in government that need to be changed so that leaders can be more responsible and altruistic. But in the context of compromising and collaborating with people who are evil, I think that there are people who are evil who affect the actions of other individuals. And, well, obviously. And so it's not, if those other individuals are future sources of suffering, then collaborating with one evil person can set a social precedent for less suffering, because then if you can persuade an evil person to do good, then they in turn can persuade others to do good. And that's why I think that people who are principled or moral need to, and I would argue that I'm a very principled and moral person, but when I say people who are principled, I mean absolute, like moral absolutism. And I'm more concerned about the greater good than about moral absolutism, because I understand that sacrifices need to be made in order for the least suffering to occur. And so these sacrifices, I would argue, can involve overlooking people's transgressions. So if someone has been rehabilitated, then for the sake of their ability to have an impact and reduce suffering caused by the people that they have social bonds with, it is optimal to simply persuade them. Now, as for compromises, that's an iffy territory, because obviously that's a two-way thing. You can be manipulated into making compromises. The two-party system in America is an obvious example of that. Do we choose the Democrat or Republican when both are evil? So There are... So that's an obvious example of taking advantage of the lesser evil situation with the two-party system. But, yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say. And this is very relevant if your views are in the minority, because grassroots movements aren't that effective if only less than like 3% of the population believes in a cause, because that's like the kind of critical point. What do you call it? Like in... it's the critical mass for societal revolution is around 3%. So let's say only 1% of people believe that like a certain right should be protected. Then if someone breaks that right and you don't have the legal right to enforce it or punish them, then guilt is an optimal way of spreading a cause. And so when there is an unpopular right that needs protecting and you don't have the option to enforce it or seek justice, whether because it's illegal or too risky or it sets a bad precedent for your movement, then I think it is okay to collaborate with evil people who are breaking that right by either persuading them, making them feel guilty, persuading them through logic, and even making compromises, which is more situational and nuanced, because the people who you bring over to your cause have an impact on others, which reduces more suffering than you would be able to on your own. So the optimal solution is to persuade, rehabilitate, and make compromises rather than to follow moral absolutism and boycott or punish evil people, because it's a waste of time to punish someone who's been rehabilitated unless you need to set a disincentive. And for unpopular causes like animal rights, creating a disincentive or destroying property, these hurt the movement. And you could argue that you cannot demonize animal rights activists, because there's many reasons to support animal rights, whether it's for environment or health, diet, because you like animals, rather than seeing animals as the same level of existence as humans. So, or the same type of existence, right? As a person. So, yeah, I don't know, in many places there's slavery, but like, maybe you don't want to buy shoes from a sweatshop, right? But instead of punishing somebody for buying shoes from a sweatshop, you could persuade them, or you could make a compromise, right? You don't have to buy shoes from a sweatshop that uses slavery, or you don't have to buy food that's from somewhere with habitat destruction. You don't have to use, well, I use a gasoline car, and that's very hypocritical of me, but you don't have to, and I would like to make excuses to appear as a good person, but I understand that's bad. I guess my best excuse for running a gasoline car is donating $1,000 to a biochar initiative, which greatly reduces the planet's carbon footprint, because it uses... Okay, biochar basically sequesters carbon from trees as fertilizer rather than fossil fuels, because a lot of fertilizers use fossil fuels rather than carbon from the air, and trees, of course. Actually, many people don't know this. Plants absorb carbon from the air, not from the ground. I mean, they probably absorb carbon from the ground, but most of the biomass of plants comes from the air, so that's why you would want plant-based fertilizers, or even manure-based fertilizers. As opposed to, like, using fossil fuels for the synthesis of, oh my gosh, there's so many arguments about this, but, yes, most fertilizers use, even some organic fertilizers use fossil fuels. Okay, I think I've said everything I wanted to, right? Rehabilitation sets a better precedent. It's more optimal if you can minimize suffering, because someone who's motivated to do good can prevent suffering. Yes. And this is unfortunate because someone who feels guilty can act more moral than the average person. So I often overlook people's crimes because it's not... Okay, well, obviously I don't... The main reason would be because I don't want to create a risk for myself. Maybe I am just twisting my philosophy, and it would be better to be... Oh, that's illegal to say. Never mind. Maybe everything I've said in this video is to justify my lack of resolve. Yeah, I guess this whole video is to make a selfish point. Being a principled person, I think... I don't think I'm legally allowed to encourage people to be principled, though. That's just illegal. There's nothing wrong with being principled, like morally principled, like on logical values, right? Principled on logical things, like reducing suffering. Those kinds of principles, I can agree with, and I secretly support. But yeah, if you don't actually want to be involved and just be a slacktivist like me, then yeah, it's more convenient to compromise with evil people, try to bring them around to your side. It doesn't have much effect in the long term, though, because it's actually like democracy and persuasion aren't actually very effective tools for bringing about social change.